Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here. And speaking of decks I'd love to build, here is a Raffine Scheming Seer Reanimator deck by Zoop, is how I'm going to choose to pronounce that. And they said in their message to me that the goal of the deck is to build a board state and protect it at all costs to grind out their opponents. So, as always, this deck list is in the YouTube description below, and I hope that while you're listening to me, you have it open, maybe on a second monitor, maybe on your phone, and you can take a look and see what you like and what you dislike about this deck, what changes you would make, and to see if you agree with me and my thoughts. So, before getting much further, I will say this is a very strong deck. If I were to be building a Raffine deck, this would be a really good template to start with. It has quite a lot of strength, it has cards that are good for the archetype, and it is covered in staples over multiple formats. These are modern playable cards, these are commander's power cards. It's a really well-built deck. But I will have a thought here. Notice this deck says Reanimator, and notice that Zoop said the goal of their deck is to build a board state and protect it at all costs to grind out my opponents. Isn't that an interesting statement for a Reanimator deck? Now, between you and I, when I think Reanimator, I think of a deck that cheats in a very powerful creature into play and then rides that to victory, mainly using the incredibly powerful abilities of that creature to all but guarantee that the game is theirs. So it's interesting to me that this deck from the creator is described as a stalling deck primarily. So let's look at these elements a little closer. The first idea I always have is that if you're creating a Reanimator deck, I want to see what your top end is. What are you reanimating? And just like we've done before in other decks that have a high top end, we're going to look at them and we're going to see which cards are the strongest. Traditionally, we don't want to run too many reanimation targets. We want to have a few that we're looking for. And we want multiple ways to get them. But we're going to be back to that. First, we're going to see the power of these cards. Now, considering this deck has 31 lands, 34 with MDFCs, and what I would consider a very nice collection of mana rocks, I will say the top end does start closer to 5. Archfiend of Ifnir, definitely a very viable reanimation target here, because if you reanimate Archfiend of Ifnir and attack, causing a bunch of discards, you will wipe the board for all your opponents. So even though maybe not what you would consider as a reanimator target, I'm going to lump him in. And before we go any further, I actually should really quickly remind everyone what the commander does. Raffine is a 1/4 for 3 flying ward 1, and whenever you attack, one of your attacking creatures connives X, where X is the number of attacking creatures. What that means is that you're going to draw X, and then you're going to discard X in one trigger. And then for every non-land card you discard, that creature will get a +1/+1 counter. I like that. I like that he's like a movie theater, like the light coming through, shining. That's really neat. All right, so let's look at the other cards that we could be reanimating. Bone Miser is another strong card in a deck like this. Once again, working with the discard synergy, and this turns our discards into creatures. We discard into zombies, lands into mana, and the rest into draw cards. If you've ever played Waste Not, you are very familiar with this ability. Now, is this a reanimator target like Archfiend of Ifnir is? I don't know. Not in a reanimation that wants to close the game. This would definitely grind out the game if you can play this and then summon a bunch of tutus. But I don't know about the power level of this card as a reanimation target. I think this is a very fair 5 mana 4/4 that, if removed, won't do anything if you don't get to discard beforehand. So I'm down to keep Bone Miser, but I wouldn't consider them to be a reanimation target. Consecrated Sphinx is very, very similar in the sense that Consecrated Sphinx does nothing until your opponent's draw step, which, albeit, is very soon after reanimating Consecrated Sphinx, but it is worth noticing. I have gotten medium to this card over time. I think if your opponents don't play removal, this is a very strong card. But as your play group plays more and more removal, the less and less I'm interested in this card. That being said, that is with the caveat that I'm paying 6 mana for it. So if I am casting Reanimate on Consecrated Sphinx, I am very, very okay if they remove it. Even one trigger with Consecrated Sphinx puts you very far ahead. So absolutely, reanimation target, fantastic. Elshnorn, I love Elshnorn. I've said it before, I'll say it again. She is a board clear that is constant, and she is very strong in decks like this where you want to go wide. You drop her, and all your 2/2s become 4/4s, and then you're getting close to lethal already. Without a doubt, Elshnorn is fantastic. Hallbreaker Horror, less into. I don't particularly like Hallbreaker Horror. When you're reanimating Hallbreaker Horror, you're not taking advantage of either the flash or the fact that it can't be countered. So you might as well ignore the first 2 lines of text. And then whenever you cast a spell, you get an ability. Even with all the free spells, I don't know how often you're triggering this. And as a reminder, its 2 triggers are either to bounce a spell or to bounce a non-land to its owner's hand. Both of these are okay. They're not really where you want to be in a deck like this, though. You want to be attacking, you want to be aggressive, you want to drop a very powerful card like Elshnorn, and then you want that card, your reanimation target, to do the work for you. Hallbreaker Horror is really good in flash decks, in instant decks, and even though I would say a good chunk of this deck is instant speed, a lot of them you can't just throw out. A lot of them do cost mana. You're not going to just throw out a mana drain to bounce a permanent, right? You're going to hold on to it. And counterspells actually are kind of not. It's kind of a nombo because if you're countering the spell, like if there is an uncounterable spell on the stack, you cannot. You can use a counterspell to bounce it, but you rather hold that counterspell for a different spell. It's a bit of a weird combination of cards. So I don't love Hallbreaker Horror. Jin-Gitaxias, I think Jin-Gitaxias is fine. I don't think it's great. I do appreciate that it protects itself if it tries to get removed. Your opponents need 2 spells. So I do like it. I like it a lot more than Hallbreaker Horror. I think this is fine. Sarah's Emissary, I just don't think it has the strength that it does in 1v1 formats, because generally you tend to know your opponent's deck. This card can't protect you from board clears, and that's a pretty big one. Even with Linvala and Selfless Spirit, I don't know. I'm a little medium on this. I think if you know your opponents very, very well, it is a very strong card. But when I think of the idea of locking my opponents out of playing things, I don't think this does the job like Jin-Gitaxias does. Because you still need to counter every single card that can remove. You say instant and they use Vindicate on Sarah's Emissary, and it's done nothing. You say sorcery and they use Path, etc., etc. There's not a lot of ways to completely shut down your opponents, and not in the same way like Jin-Gitaxias demands a lot of attention and will at least stop one card. Sarah's Emissary has this cooling power on the battlefield, because if you name the right card, those cards are not going to be used against you. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be played. For example, if you play this card and you say sorcery, and I'm your opponent, and I have, let's say, a board clear, I might look at the table in terms of politics and ask someone if they have an instant speed removal for one of your protection creatures. So such as you have Selfless Spirit, could you try to path to exile that Selfless Spirit? Then by the time it gets to my side, I can Supreme Verdict, and with that, we've settled this problem very, very easily. Now you do have a lot of counter magic, but it is important to understand that Sarah's Emissary does not layer on protection in the same way Jin-Gitaxias does, right? Jin-Gitaxias needs your opponents to overcommit. Not does it need, it encourages your opponents to overcommit, which you can then use your counter magic to further take advantage of that interaction. Whereas Sarah's Emissary is largely ignored, right? Because if you Sarah's Emissary and you say creatures and I have Solitude in hand, it's not like that Solitude is never going to be played. It's not like I think, oh no, I should just discard this card. It's just gonna stay in my hand. And if you don't win the game off the back of that Sarah's Emissary for a number of reasons, if it's bounced, if it is destroyed, anything can happen. My Solitude hasn't gone anywhere. I still maintain the advantage in my card in my hand that I had before. So for all these reasons, I'm pretty medium on Sarah's Emissary. I'm sure there's other ways to make a lock happen. I wonder like a Mycosynth Lattice sort of thing where everything is turned into one card type, and so that protection is much more ubiquitous. But as for right now, I'm not too impressed. Toxtril is great. I think Toxtril is really, really cute. I love the idea of playing Toxtril on a heavy creature board and just immediately starting to destroy your opponent's creatures turn by turn. That being said, is this kind of just a poor imitation of Elesh Norn that requires two end steps? Oh, it's each end step. Never mind, I like this. Keep Toxtril. My goodness. Reading the card explains the card, and Toxtril is great. Perfect. Moving on. Jin Gitaxias, I think, is fine. Much like consecrated Sphinx, you are waiting for a trigger to occur in order to maximize the value out of this card. So this trigger is your end step, which is a lot closer than your opponent's draw step, right? Because they have an additional step on their draw step, which is their upkeep. So even if your next opponent has tapped out, you play Consecrated Sphinx, they can untap, Swords to Plowshares, and then go to the draw. Jin Gitaxias takes that away. Now, the strength of its your opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7 is a little varying. Once again, I don't expect Jin Gitaxias to stick around to that point, mainly because your opponent has had an untap and they've drawn, and now they can put all their efforts to taking out Jin Gitaxias. However, I don't think that's a problem. Once again, you cast Reanimate on this, right? Or Stitch Together, or Animate Dead, or Dance of the Dead. You are perfectly happy with drawing 7 and just moving on, even if they destroy Jin Gitaxias. So all in all, I'm mainly a fan. I think some of them can be removed. And you might be thinking, well, okay, but that's a bit of a problem. One of the benefits of Raffine is that we want more cards to discard. Why are we removing these reanimation cards if we want to discard them? Unfortunately, that's just a part of the situation. We might want to just have Entomb effects, which, let's see if you're even playing one. Nope, no Entomb. And then, what's the other one? Buried Alive. I find these to be great. I don't know to what extent you are playing tutors, but these are soft tutors because they go into the graveyard, they set up the other half of your deck. So if you draw Entomb and Reanimate, well, you don't even worry about Raffine. You can set it up yourself. I like these. I don't find them to be too unfair because they are very, very visible to your opponents to what you're doing. And if they know you're a Reanimate deck, to an extent, they could be expecting this. With all the powerful counter magic you have, I think this isn't too powerful to put into your deck. The other thing I'm looking at, and I wouldn't mind more, is I wouldn't mind a few more 1-mana creatures. You are particularly low on these, and I think you might be underestimating the difference between, let's say in both cases you play Raffine turn 3. I think you might be underestimating the power of attacking with 2 creatures and attacking with 3 creatures on that turn. There is a big difference in how deep you dig, and putting an extra +1/+1 counter can pull a creature out of, I don't know, not bolt range, but out of the range of certain removal, certain blocking, and improve the power of cards like Esper Sentinel and Mausoleum Wanderer. Sorry. With that in mind, I would probably think of a few more flyers. I mean, not that it is a flyer, but Tormented Soul is really cleanly an unblockable creature that you can pile +1/+1 counters on. And as soon as it gets to 5/5 or beyond, you can just leave it like that. A 5/5 for one, a 6/6 for one. You're already playing. Where are you? You're already playing one in Sarah Ascendant. This one is a little more work, but is a lot harder to interact with because you can't block or can't be blocked. Another one I would say, it is a owl of sorts. Ooh, that is phonetically correct, but not spelling correct. Let's see where we have. Judge's Familiar is the one I'm thinking of. Judge's Familiar is. There's a lot of familiars in Magic. That does make sense. Did I see it? Did I miss it? There we go. Judge's Familiar. Similar to Mausoleum Wanderer, its effect doesn't scale with power, but just a decent creature that can attack and that can kick your opponents off one turn of effects. If they're trying to play on curve, you just sacrifice it to stop them. That's pretty strong, and your opponents have to respect it. They can't forget about it. It's just a 1-mana creature. There's kind of 1 to 2. I wouldn't even mind 3 more 1-mana creatures just to have something to do with your extra mana outside of holding up your counter magic, because I feel as if the difference, if you have an extra creature on turn 2 and the game is progressing, I'm not saying normally, but like positively, where no one's board clearing every turn, you're going to be thinking of as if that additional creature on turn 2 means you have an additional creature every turn you attack, and every turn you attack, you're going to dig deeper, grow your creatures more. It is in that way a critical mass deck where the dream is to have Raffine and 4 other creatures attack all at once, right? Then you're digging quite deeply and immediately getting the effects of it. You're immediately getting your creature, your reanimation target in the graveyard, your reanimation spell in your hand, your interaction in hand. Like that kind of setup is what you want. And then also, I don't think it would hurt to pull out discard cast this artifact creature. Cannot remember its name. It is none of these are. Let's say play instead. There it is. Containment Construct. Containment Construct says whenever you discard a card, you may exile it, and if you do, you may play that card this turn. Now, obviously you don't want to exile your reanimation targets, but this isn't a bad creature to have. It lets you go just a little further with your value by exiling a land. You're a little land light because most of the MDFCs you want to play. So I would consider you a little land light. So being able to discard a land and still be able to play it is really nice, which also lets you keep more cards in your hand. Because then you're instead of keeping the land in hand, you've discarded it and kept something else in its place. So that's something I think is noteworthy. Otherwise, I think this deck is good. There are a few other things, a few other cards I would think of just really quickly that come to mind. Dark Confidants and Keen Duelist are always creatures that I really like, both with the same ability, though Keen Duelist shares the Bob trigger amongst 2 players. Thalia fits really well into a deck like this. I don't know if you're playing not Dothy Voidwalker, sorry. The Draneth Magistrate, also a very good attacker, also very, very frustrating for your opponents to play against. Timna, who's still very expensive, unsurprisingly, but Timna Very, very strong card in a deck like this. Just even more benefits for attacking multiple opponents. And then I would also say Brina, one of my commanders, one of my favorite cards. Brina is a lot of text, but the short version is that she draws you a lot of cards and she grows a lot of creatures. Much like Keen Duelist, there is a political aspect where your opponents can draw extra cards, but you will grow your creatures way faster than it matters the extra cards they draw. And with that in mind, I think that would work really well as another Raffine effect, because in Esper, it is particularly difficult to put +1/+. Oh, you do have Timna. Okay. I should have checked a bit lower. Okay, glad to hear. But yes, I would definitely look to grow your creatures a little more, because outside of Raffine, you just can't get that effect. Finally, Commissioner Severina Ring. I don't love this card. I understand the perceived strength of her, where she is attacking. She's draining all your opponents for a number of creatures, but without tokens, I don't particularly like this. You are as the deck is now, even with a few more 1/1s, you're not developing that quickly. So to play a 3-drop that you have to wait a turn to even trigger, because she's not on attack, she's not Adeline, right? She's when she attacks. So it's slow. She's slow, and then her execution for 2 mana to sacrifice a creature to draw a card. That's too expensive. That's not a rate that's playable in a deck like this. You're really using her for the first part of her text, and even then, it's not too impressive. So with that in mind, I would probably cut her. But the rest of the deck, I do really like. I think Yeah, I think the relative strength of your game plan is based on the relative strength of this section of your creatures from 1 to 4 mana, because they are the ones that you're going to see the most, and your reanimation targets are going to be your other main plan, but are not going to be as consistent in the sense that you will have to develop to the board to an extent before you drop your before you try to buried alive and then reanimate, or even just discard off of Raffine and reanimate. So keep that in mind, that the bulk of the deck, the strength of the deck is actually here, because this is what represents most of your games and how your draw engine works. With that in mind, I do really like the very nice interaction suite, because I think that works very well with Planet. I hope this was helpful. I wouldn't have a lot of changes to the deck. I've just tried to point out a few places that it's weak. And I think with those places changing, I think the deck is pretty good to be complete. The only decisions from this point on is whether or not you want to power up or power down the deck, depending on your play group. But outside of going towards a more CDH level strength, I think this deck is very, very good and very close to the top of its power. So I'll leave it to you to decide what you want to do. As always, if you want to like, comment, subscribe, I say as always, but I always forget to say that. You got to do the YouTube thing, right? And click those clicks and click those links. But if you have another deck you'd like me to look at, or if you'd like me to look at another draft of this deck, in the video description will be a link to a form. Fill out that form, I'll look at your deck, and when I have a chance, I'll make a video for it. Yeah, I'm really taken aback by this. I really like this movie theater quality that they've put into Raffine. This is a very cool deck and a very cool command. All right, good luck.